Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Friday, June 5th. All of those announcements of the Summer Games Fest are happening just about right now, so we're probably not going to have too much news around those today. I suppose I could have tried to live stream and sit through all of that had I been awake and willing to do that, but honestly it would have been just a huge amount of waste of time. Yeah. So we'll scroll down the 24-hour peak charts to see what people are actually playing. And yeah, there is, unfortunately, I think, just because gaming is such a big tent, there's just a group of people that are all about the hype and watching trailers. And then there's a group of people that are actually playing video games on days like this. And those groups probably merge when there aren't big announcements. Honestly, I think more often than not, I probably fall into the category of being more about knowing news around games than actually playing games. So I have to kind of be careful not to just always be looking for the next big thing instead of enjoying what is in front of you at the moment. But yeah, that's probably good advice for anyone, frankly. I saw Yu-Gi-Oh! Has actually done something interesting too, in that they've added extended art cards where the art goes past the borders of the frame, and seemingly have some special animations, which isn't really that big of a thing as we look through the most wishlisted games, but it is something new, and anything new for Yu-Gi-Oh! At all in any form is something to keep an eye on, considering how the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh! Died, and it seems like Konami, who I think is in charge of the games, really doesn't have any direction. So yeah, as far as the catch up, I'm still going through that humble bundle of chess games. Most recently I played, to my satisfaction, Pawnbarian, which has movements like chess pieces, but also introduces a whole bunch of other chess pieces that move in different ways. Ghosts and unicorns and capybaras, which is a misspelling of capybara. But yeah, the game itself doesn't really play that much like chess. It has chess movements, but then it gets very far from that, and it has a smaller chessboard, and you're going through 7 floors for 3 different locations. Once you've won with those 3 different locations plus a tutorial one, then you unlock several other characters. Once you've won each of those 3 different locations with any of the characters, then you unlock the ability to play tougher floors. And looking at the achievements, which I did not get a single achievement with Pawnbarian, the chains go up to 10 plus, and I was barely able to even get to chain 1, let alone win on chain 1. There is a blight mechanic in Pawnbarian, and all of the areas use this blight mechanic very heavily, so you are very often taking damage if you're not extremely careful. And then there is also a nimble mechanic where the enemies will move backwards when you try to attack them, which makes it really annoying too. On top of, there's an immune mechanic where some enemies can't be attacked if you're north, south, east, or west of them. You can only attack them from a distance or diagonally, and then there's some that can only be attacked if you're north, south, east, and west of them. Inherently, I think the game is fine, but I cannot recommend it to anybody who doesn't already have a fairly large amount of love for chess. It was stupid of me to buy the Humble Bundle with chess games. Unlike other games that I bought for my backlog, these games are very much too close to the line of games I would have never chosen to play. But it's nice to try something new. But yeah, it's probably more a case that I don't even have an indifference against chess. I may have an active dislike of chess. And so even games that are using the chess mechanic may be beyond where I can really tolerate. And I'm pretty sure I did a quick look on some other chess game before then, but I can't even remember it. Yeah. I was just about as... Oh yeah, I did a quick look on 5D chess with time travel, and that was actually chess with more rules and with time travel and parallel dimensions and things like that, and that just made the game incredibly complicated, and I already find chess to be too complicated for my taste. And you know, I still am at the moment suggesting if you want to play chess, chess.com is probably your best way to do it. I'm pretty sure membership is free to start. And the phone apps certainly benefit quite a bit there. Which, yeah, as long as I'm going through these chess games, I'm gonna have a fairly boring warm-up section. Yeah, I am fairly confident now that seasonality is really affecting my channel. I'm just getting a lot of new subscribers. I'm getting a lot more views on live streams. So either the algorithm is straight up lying to me, which is always possible, or summer is the time to try and bring people into becoming longer term fans. So yeah, over this weekend I will continue to schedule videos and hopefully convince people to stay around throughout the whole year. I've hit a point where my RSS feeds and my podcasts, I'm using a really old program called BeyondPod, which isn't even available anymore, is starting to feel kind of silly. Problem there is that there still really isn't an RSS feed app better than BeyondPod. I just don't like how any of the others work, and I have a ton of RSS feeds that don't just feed in the podcast, and then there's a ton of podcasts that have not transitioned to anything else. Maybe I should look at Apple Podcasts and see if there's something there, but yeah, YouTube in particular is where podcast should be moving to, unfortunately, or Apple Podcasts, or both. And yeah, a lot of older podcasts that I've been listening to for years aren't going to change, and frankly, most of the podcasts that I was listening to, I think I have just been listening to them for so many years now, I'm ready to stop. I've stopped really listening to them. Inherently, I got bored with them. Then I started listening to Ron and Fez reruns every single day on YouTube, and that was taking up all of that time. But yeah, a lot of the podcasts I was listening to too were also just like technology, and certainly in this economy, hearing about new computer stuff isn't really necessary because nobody's buying new computers. And speaking of the economy, I just saw that Wall Street Bets on Reddit was posting memes of a major downturn in the stock market, which, yeah, seems like that has happened, which isn't super surprising because it was fairly high a couple days ago. Yeah. And so they're posting a meme of like no crying in the casino is posted on a sign, and then the casino is actually the stock market. But yeah, I don't think there's too much to say there other than almost certainly the richest of the rich people are getting advanced information and insider information and trading on in ways that is not available to the average person who has a average accountant handling their retirement, their 401k retirement type thing in the United States. I'm still playing Warrior World. I got to one boss fight and really was struggling, and it turned out there's an enemy that did this dash attack, and the first time it does one dash and then you're supposed to pound the ground at a certain time, but then after you do that the first time, then it does 2 dashes, then it does 3 dashes, then it does 4 dashes. I really didn't catch on to that thought. It wasn't giving enough audio and visual feedback to help me, and inherently I imagine that's because Wario World for the GameCube is really short game. It has like 4 worlds with 2 levels each and 1 boss, and I think that's the entirety of the game. Warrior games tend to be somewhat shorter, and then it has a whole bunch of mini games if you could connect to the Game Boy Advance. So they were definitely pushing that idea, and at that point there, as far as I know, still isn't a way through the Dolphin emulator to emulate a Game Boy Advance actually connecting to a GameCube game, which, yeah, for as much as that feature is used, you would think that you might want to just write an API that integrated with a Game Boy Advance emulator to just launch the Game Boy Advance emulator and let the data send. And maybe there is a way to do it and I just don't understand it. I haven't done the research. But yeah, I am still having a horrible, terrible sleep schedule where I'm waking up at like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, which gives me no time to get my head straight, eat some breakfast, and actually accomplish anything for anybody who is going home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Because yeah, it does take about 2 hours. I certainly remember back in my youth going to school and just absolutely hating that process too, where you're being forced to wake up at, 4 or 5, not 4, but like 5:56 in the morning, and then just being mentally not alert, eating cereal for some reason, cheap carbs, I guess, and then going to school and being expected to actually be able to do anything in that first class where, yeah, it's no wonder so many kids sleep in school. It's just a terrible, terrible time to ask anybody to wake up. And I often thought it sure would be nice if there was like a night school option. But what they call night school in the United States usually is, oh, somebody has failed or dropped out and they have to take extra classes to catch up, or night schools for straight up adults who are trying to get a GED. But yeah, my sleep schedule's awful. I'm not really accomplishing anything because of it, and when I try to go to sleep after an hour or two of that not working, I will grab the Steam Deck and play some of that for really no good reason, since it isn't making any content. It is, I guess, just a retirement plan type entertainment. It's just like going back and playing some older games that I always wanted to play, or may have wanted to play but didn't get around to it, and hopefully not too much of going back and playing games I had already played, although there's probably going to be some of that too. And yeah, it certainly is nice now with save states and all of that. Like, I would have not been able to beat Super Metroid if it weren't for save states. There would have been just far too many things that I couldn't have pulled off. Although, in fairness, I'm still running into some problems too. Like, there's a spinning mechanic in Wario World that almost certainly worked fairly well with the GameCube analog stick, which didn't have as high of a level of what's the word? Resolution, I guess, might be the right phrase to use as far as how you could spin. So when you're using a Steam Deck's analog stick that is going to be much more sensitive and give higher levels of information, trying to spin in a circle gets a lot harder. Of course, it is possible that it also just sucked originally and was barely doable. Even now we have games that come out that are broken, but let us not forget that in the old days, broken games happened very, very frequently. I am putting more thought into getting back to trying to make more progress building my new computer. Need to move over to a new phone at some point too. Of course, these are all things I would have said 6 months ago, maybe even a year and 6 months ago. But yeah, particularly over this weekend, if I'm going to have the macro running, that is a great time to force myself to try to do some other stuff, because my computer will be busy. Feel like I watched a movie on Prime Video too in the past couple days, but I, for life of me, can't remember what it was if I did. Oh no, I watched an over-the-air video of Psych 2, Lassie Come Home, which, yeah, there's a third Psych movie, I think, that's been made, and possibly a fourth. Lassie, as in Lassiter, the character, is the main focus in that movie, and certainly your experience around the movie is going to drastically change whether or not you know the actor has like a horrible, debilitating disease. And so I hope they didn't have to make this movie just to keep him in SAG for his health care, but I fear that might exactly have been the case. So they start the movie with him getting shot and having a stroke, and have him in a private hospital recovery facility for the entire movie. And I'm surprised they could even get him to do one scene where he actually stood up out of a wheelchair at the very end. And I feel like the way they did it was that they had several strong people just off screen holding him up and lifting him up, or wires or something. But yeah, the actor is really sick, but they don't want to just kill off the actor, because yeah, that would suck. And what's funny is Lasseter as a character, before he was sick, which his sickness also had him just show up for like one FaceTime video in the first movie. But actually, in the canon of the Psych Show, Lasseter is mostly an annoyance character that they didn't really like. So they've softened the character quite a bit to follow the fandom who know he's sick. And otherwise, it's a fine Psych movie. It's not doing anything too crazy. It definitely felt like the second movie felt like it could have just been an episode of Psych, where I feel like the first movie would be more movie-like. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket and Memento Mori. Same old, which is very common, frankly, when you're playing mobile games, is that you're just going to pick the ones you want to play and stick with them forever. Or at least that's the right way to play them. It would be kind of crazy to jump into one game 1 month, then jump into another game, because you're not going to get anywhere as far as progressing in these gacha style games. I wish I had a different list that was non-gacha games on mobile, but honestly, the number of non-gacha style mobile games probably don't matter, because they probably don't make even a few $1,000s a month. We now have the May information. This was down last stream as they were updating it. And what can we see? Change to Windows 11 is up 2%. Intel speeds are up by 0.28%. Or the amount of RAM is up by 0.28%. Intel CPU speeds are down. Cores are down. And the number of people using a 3060 is down, while that still has the major graphics card. Fewer people playing 1080p. Fewer people with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. These numbers and the change percentage doesn't really tell you that much, though. And the big news would be like Linux adoption, and I don't imagine there is going to be a big announcement or change for Linux adoption until the Steam Machine comes out, and if the Steam Machine actually sells in large numbers and gets turned on and used by whatever month that happens in. I did see on the Steam blog that they have revamped the Steam store front page. We'll see if it looks any different. I may very well have already been in the beta of that. Yeah. And certainly when you're just doing quick looks of games, that makes it harder to schedule things. That's one more game to manually set up, because the first episode of anything I still have to manually set up. I really thought Punbarian didn't have any achievements. But yeah, I would say 10 hours is about right, probably closer to 8 into Punbarian. It's a fun game. I wouldn't recommend it to non-chess fans, but if you are even a casual chess fan, it's a very different game, so it's very supplemental, where 5D chess is almost a replacement for regular chess for the minute few who find regular chess too easy. And Chess Ultra is just chess, and not particularly, I think, the greatest of chess games. As far as achievements for a chess game, I think Chess Ultra probably has it on the nose, where it's giving you achievements for playing certain moves, whereas the achievements we should look at Punbarian are like way too difficult. Conquer all the dark dungeons with the Punbarian. Only 18% of players have done that. Doing all the dungeons with the next character, the Templar Knight, only 9% have done that. The Shogun is 5.1%. And then you get into less than 2%. Conquer all the dungeons with the Punbarian at chain 5 or higher. Conquer all the dungeons with the Knight Templar, with the Shogun. And then I guess update 1 added the Nomad and the Capizurker and the Mystic. So when you would have first had this game, maybe you would have had only 3 characters to play as, which would have had you focus a lot more. Adding another 3 gets you up to 6. Then all the exact same achievements. Beating things at chain 10, which may be the maximum chain, but yeah, you can see by the time update 1 even came out, you're getting 6%, 6%, 6%, then down to 1.6% or lower for all the chains. Just really, really difficult achievements. Yeah. I do kind of bemoan the fact that the escape games, puzzle games like Botany Manor, that there just aren't that many of them and they're too expensive, because I would like to play more of those type of games. Okay. So one of the things that they were talking about is just like more hovering over things and having pop-ups. My modification of this may have eliminated a lot of that. Here we have a pop-up popping up, and here we have a pop-up popping up, but none of those. The Steam is doing a summer showcase of Showcase. Yeah, summer weirdly, I guess, is also the point where people should be playing games, but then people are also very pushed to just get hyped around what is coming new instead of actually playing what has already come out. And they're putting a Steam controller here. They're probably putting their thumb there. Sending a gift card seems to have been added, but then it's possible those were there. I didn't really go out of my way to go crazy with the things that are being blocked when I changed the appearance of this game for this page for verticality reasons. So I imagine the gift card thing has just been moved. Yeah. What we should do is look at this the way I have it set up and then look at it further. They're trying to say that the algorithm is going to be a little bit more personalized and that popular is going to be a little bit more about popular games, and less about new games. There is definitely a problem with there being too many games coming out every single day and not being able to really highlight and promote those games to the right eyes to people who might actually want to see it. I also saw a YouTube video where somebody was making adult games for in the Godot engine, and they were talking about how their game got stolen because they didn't put the right kind of security features into it, and so just that did certainly open my eyes to the possibility that a lot of these asset flip games, these low effort games, these adult games that show up on Steam might be straight up stolen games that would have been on a smaller platform like itch.io or some other personal website or something. Might even be unfinished games that have just been stolen, and if not stolen whole cloth, they might have been, games might be stolen to strip it for parts, so your music in your game and things like that. Anyways, the talk was just about like watermarking videos and audio and making a trail, a paper legal trail of how it can be proven that you own the game, so you can do DMCAs, and how you should probably take an open source engine like Godot and fork it and change some things around so that it isn't super easy to just automatically decompile the engine and the game in the engine. It does feel like to me that there is a problem that needs to be better focused on in the Godot engine as far as final commercial products, as far as just having better encrypted files and better obfuscation. But in fairness, there's plenty of people who are capable of cracking games with regular old-fashioned DRM in the Unreal Engine and the Unity engine too. Ideally, I would want a specific unique key to be issued by Steam or whatever storefronts that would unlock only the game, that game for that one computer, or that one Steam account. Also, you could certainly put a lot of your stuff in the cloud online, so even if they decompile it, they can't get too much. So they've added the personal calendar, which for me is going to be fairly useless because I just put way too much on the wish list and the fall list. We do probably need to look at all of the new wish list, and we'll probably should also look at the fall list, just to see what that looks like too. Here they have recommended games based on games you play, and then top played Steam Deck games. So they're changing the categories quite a bit. They still want to really push community recommendations, although there is very much a valid question to ask as far as what is the actual community. Is this game even out yet? Because yeah, I have a hard time feeling like there really is a video game community at all, and I have a hard time really agreeing with a lot of people who are gamers. Frankly, there's a lot of people who stay in very small regions of gaming and they don't play anything too niche or unknown. And there's a lot of people who are just completely positive and unwilling to be critical in any way, at which point they are not going to say anything new and they aren't going to say anything interesting. It just gets down to that point. Yeah. I imagine a lot of those English classes taught in the United States created a lot of people like that, where you're told to make a book report, and so book reports really just push people to summarize and recap what happens. And you see that with a lot of gaming content creators too, is that they are just summarizing what happens. You see it even worse with the movie content creators too, is that they are literally just summarizing what's happening in the movie, and then maybe in the last minute they'll say it was a good movie, not a great movie, not an awful movie, and that's about it. But a good review would actually have an opinion and would have comparisons and references, and a good rebuttal to a review would have an actual opinion and examples and references, not just be rage bait. Yeah. The root trees are dead. That feels like a weird name. It was a puzzle game. And I think they brought back the infinite scroll, but it looks like the infinite scroll is not that infinite for me. I probably told it not to do that. Yeah. It's already on the wish list. And then House Flipper Remastered. Is it in early access? No. So mostly positive at 70%. I'll leave that on the follow list. And then 84% with 25 reviews positive. Now see, this is the weirdness with the recommendation system here of saying it's positive versus mostly positive, because this is 84% positive, but there are fewer reviews, so they're just saying positive, where the other game we just looked at was mostly positive with fewer percentage of positive reviews, but there was just a lot more of them. So there is a floor, as it were, a minimal number of reviews one needs. Okay. So there's supposed to be a on sale thing that they were adding to the wish list, which probably is going to be mostly just a visual change, because you could always have sorted by discount and yeah, gone through the discount. Of course, the biggest problem with things on the wish list that are on sale is that they don't really get highlighted very much when an actual big summer sale is happening, which I imagine we will have a summer sale happen. Probably not going to buy any games myself. I'll look at it and consider it, but yeah. But there's also a deceptiveness in some of this, like Dragon Ball Xenoverse, I think is one of those games where the base game might be 90% off, but then it still might be $80 to get all of the DLC characters that you probably want in that case. And let's look at this mixed reviewed game. And yeah, I'm not gonna do a wishlist cleanup here. I have way too many games on the wishlist. The issue that happens in the past is that you have a ranking system that goes to like, well, I guess 1,000 maybe before it stops. Which, in fairness, wishlisting and wanting 1,000 games is kind of crazy, but not that crazy. Like if you were just coming to PC, if you were trying to build up a large collection of games, 1,000 games on the wishlist makes a decent amount of sense. In fairness, I probably have closer to 5,000 games on the wishlist, on my wishlist though, and if I was to really cull it down, I could probably eliminate half of the games. It does feel like it might be being a little bit more responsive, though. Like, usually there's a real struggle to get down to the bottom. And I was wrong, it's more than 5,000. We are approaching 7,000. And I feel like it stopped adding a number after 1,000 in the past. So yeah, little bits of improvement, and I think probably some improvement on the overall performance. Even if I was to make a macro going through this, though, I don't know how I could really curate the wish list, or if I even really would want to curate the wish list. As much as I might want to curate the other things. This is a free-to-play fantasy game. Should probably put that back on the follow list and think about just adding it to my account. And then this game, guess I wanted it to be good, but it isn't, so I'll just take it off the wish list. And then let's see, Resident Evil 4 Gold Edition would be $15. So let's take off my changes. So apparently there's an ad that's being blocked at the very top for the Gothic remake. And then they did move the send a gift card, which I think in the past was here. But I think that's pretty much all that's really changed here on the front page. Honestly, if this is just a case of performance being improved, that's still a huge step forward for the Steam front page, in particular, and Steam in general, because any little bit of frustration is something that's going to become an issue. as the follow list. As far as the follow list goes, this still looks exactly the same, and I'll just leave it at that. A lot of the features probably on the front page I had already opted into the beta. So yeah. Let's see. We hide own games, hide early access games, and then if we hid wishlist games, well, how do I get to that point? Well, these buttons don't seem to be working at all. Interesting. So then the question would just come down to, am I going to see any hidden gems on a calendar like this, or am I just going to see games I've already looked at? And yeah, you see like June 1st, there's a massive pile of games. June 2nd, there's a massive pile of games. Massive pile, massive pile, massive pile. When you're going with 500 games. And then it maybe slows down on some days till you get to about 3 games, or even 1 game, or even a day where you don't have it. What a calendar like this really goes to show is that if you were trying to make something like Giant Bomb, which honestly I don't think that's probably the way to make a channel in the first place, is just to have multiple people reviewing games, but you almost certainly would need that to cover even this many games. Is you would have to have 2 or 3 people per day just checking out games, even unless they are incredibly like easily distracted people, and they're just going to play the game for 5 minutes and give you a ridiculous review, which at that point, why are you even buying the games or trying to get codes, review codes for the games? Now if I go the exact opposite direction and say only show me 10 games, which is very reasonable, then they're going to pick the 10 games they think are most relevant to you. A schedule like this is very doable for a single person to do. In fact, it's kind of ridiculously too small. But yeah, you'd be putting your content creation certainly in the hands of the Steam algorithm then, on top of putting it in the hands of the YouTube algorithm when you put the videos out. If you were to just use a personal calendar like this. Obviously though, this calendar isn't just for people who want to review every game. And it does kind of feel like you could lock it in to just a couple of games a day. And certainly if it's somebody's job to play games all day, yeah, when you go from 100 to 250, then you start to have a lot of things. And that is making a huge assumption too, that you could actually play one game in one day, which is not realistic really. A lot of these games are going to be week-long jobs. I've made in the past ridiculous amounts of content, and the best I've been able to ever do is 3, maybe 4 hours of content for every Monday through Friday, and that would have been 8 to 12-hour days of playing games, breaking them up into hour-long segments. it's a lot more work, certainly if you're not doing long plays and you're editing content. And it is definitely worth pointing out that the YouTube notification system puts out 3 notifications a day at maximum. And they haven't changed that system. So you really can't make any more content or cover more games without making a whole new channel, which is where a lot of the big successful content creators ended up having to do, is they had to make entirely different channels just to put something different out or to get people's attention more. I do heavily question though whether this calendar really is that helpful even for just people who want to play games though. Like, because it really is gonna probably be a small system where you're then going to have a smaller selection of games to pick and choose. But also, this isn't realistically where people actually decide to play their next game. The vast majority of gamers are much more social than me and talk to friends and look at the hype online to decide what their next game is. Or they find a sale and just grab it on a whim. A lot of people still going to GameStop and buying like console games and used discs, which, yeah, the availability and the discounts of those games are going to be random. Yeah. So yeah, Steam has the summer showcase of summer showcases with all of these. A lot of these I think have already played out or are playing right now. As far as live streams go, we'll probably on Monday have a whole bunch of news around games being announced or games actually coming out. Right now, either nothing has been announced or this page is being changed in its appearance quite a bit. Yeah. I don't really understand this idea of having so many showcases that seem to all work together so that they happen right after each other in a row. Yeah. It does seem like they are just all desperate to happen on the exact same day, and it just doesn't make any sense to have this many announcements in one day instead of having just like a week of announcements where like Monday's woman-led games and then Tuesday would be made in Australia and New Zealand games, and then just like for a whole week you could have announcements potentially. Yeah, it does make sense to have more showcases run by more people, certainly, because that then doesn't put everything in the hands of just like the video game awards deciding who's the winners and who's the losers as far as whose trailers play and whose trailers don't, and it allows each trailer to be more focused on by there being a small team in charge of 5 trailers instead of a slightly bigger team in charge of 25 trailers. But yeah, I am still very much on the anti-hype train. I feel like some of these logos definitely, and these icon things, seem like they could use some polish. Day of the Devs is kind of a great example of that. And like the skull theme there really doesn't make that much sense. And a lot of these are Like the Future Games Show, I think was PC Gamer's Future Games Show before. I think PC Gamer is running out of money. IGN Live is obviously IGN. Xbox Showcase is obviously Xbox. I suppose here's a little game I could suggest when you have a big event like this with a whole bunch of announcements. Listen to your social group, your friends, your other gamers that you see around you and talk to, and just keep an ear out to see if any of them say anything negative at all. Like, yeah. Obviously, I'm not saying you want to be surrounded by haters, but do you want to be surrounded by a bunch of yes men? Like, because I think you'll be shocked to find how many people are just totally on the hype train always around games, and then they silently suffer and just don't mention that they didn't really enjoy the games when they actually buy them and play them. I suppose I would be all forward with the hype train if it was a case that people who bought games more often than not actually made it to the credits and played the games all the way through. But I know that's not the case. It has been extremely consistent, probably for the entire history of games, that only about 30% of players make it to the credits of games. And then there is just a lot of fall off. So I just think people probably don't think about it from that perspective. Do we actually have Steam Decks in stock? I guess we do, if you buy them new and you buy them at the hugely new expensive price. I wonder if they put them back in stock for the Summer Game Fest. But yeah, very rarely do I not make it to the credits of a game, and that's not just because I'm a YouTube content creator. Like, even before being a content creator, I very rarely would stop playing a game until I'd gotten to the credits. There are some games that really don't have credits, and there are some games that are just broken and unbeatable, or too close to being broken and unbeatable. I think a lot of live service multiplayer games have no credits, as it were, so then really when you're thinking about something like Call of Duty, the question comes down to, are people who are buying Call of Duty playing 60 to 200 hours of good gameplay in those games? And probably for live service games, you are playing 60 to 200 hours. The qualifier of good gameplay hours is the question that only an individual can answer for themselves. Inherently, I'm in a weird situation where I have a lot of free time too, though, so a lot of time to play games. I know a lot of people are struggling to get hours at their jobs to make enough money to pay their bills and survive, and they just want to turn off their brains when playing a game. And inherently, that is fine, but I think those people probably should also admit, hey, I'm not an average gamer, I'm not really a type of gamer that should be recommending or talking up games to other people, because I am really a fair weather gamer, or don't really have enough time to put into that hobby. In fairness, I probably should say the exact same thing about myself and Legos. I definitely am having more of a thoughts of putting the Lego hobby on the back burner and stop getting any more, particularly since they have announced their biggest in piece count architectural set ever. It's the biggest in piece count set ever, but it is also an architectural set of this architectural building that just, I think, relatively recently got finished building, and it is a Hagya, like Indian temple type. I think it might be actually Christian based, but in India type design. It has a big angel and a bunch of towers with other angels around it. Lots of towers, very big. Yeah. That is definitely not a set I would want to get, because once you get to those scales, you're building custom tables just to display that one Lego set. And what you're actually building is going to be very repetitive and kind of ridiculous. Let's see if I can bring it up just to show it. Lego biggest set. Of course, I searched this, and I'll probably just get results for the last biggest set, which might have been the Colosseum. And yeah, here we go. Is it not Hagya? The Sagrada Familia. And this is CNN. So yeah, there's giant towers with a giant cross at the top, and then it's surrounded by angels, each angel representing things, and then surrounded by a whole bunch of other crosses. A huge architectural thing. Gray, not gray, what is this? Brown pieces all over the place, which is kind of accurate to the color of it, but also probably is a very default color for Lego pieces too. And yeah, just to get to this level of detail, it had to probably be the biggest set ever. It's in Barcelona, completion after 144 years. It definitely feels like to me that this was a set that they built a few that were going to be on display, and instead they decided to sell it. But it is also, I think, $750. 12,060 pieces, all going to be really tiny pieces. It is 24 inches high. It is the world's tallest church, the real one is. $799.99. And yeah, there's just going to be a ton of tiny pieces. Probably not too much you can actually even see. They probably had to sneak a camera in here just to get this angle. Yeah. There was, for decades, it was considered that the Sagrada Familia was considered unbuildable due to the architectural complexity and the loss of Gaudi's plans and models during the 1936 to 1939 Spanish Civil War. So they'd been trying to build it this whole time for 144 years. By the time Gaudi died in 1926, an estimated 10 to 15% had been built. Let's see. And then the Pope is going to inaugurate the tower on Wednesday. This Wednesday? Very possibly this Wednesday. When was this printed? 7 hours ago. Yeah. So yeah, kind of a big deal. Now, at some point here, this feels a lot like the Tower of Babel, in that you're just building this giant tower. But I guess the assumption is if it is a church, Catholic church, then maybe the Tower of Babel won't happen and it won't collapse. We will see. It does certainly seem like you are pushing your limits. Inherently, we don't have a way of building buildings anywhere as tall as we would like to build them. Not because people want to be up high, but at some point a building is going to stop being a building and it's going to start become a ladder to get into space in an easier way. But yeah, the material, the compaction and crushing action of things standing on top of things is not something that we can easily get around. It's always kind of ridiculous to me how much money and time in 144 years has got to be a new record for how much time it's taken to build these giant churches. Meanwhile, I imagine Barcelona could have done a lot more with the space and with as far as housing people or even farming or growing food, and the money certainly could have paid for the poor. But yeah, if I was going to get the Catholic Church to help push for a church being built, I definitely would have every single one of these towers be vertical farming to grow food and housing to house the homeless. But even if you do that, then you're basically going to probably, the Catholic Church would almost certainly force anybody who got food from there to attend Mass and be Catholic, and force everyone who lives there to attend Mass and be Catholic. And with Catholicism comes the heavy push to have babies and make more little Catholics, at which point your population problems only increase. And it's kind of a boring set too. It very possibly is a reuse of some of the Harry Potter pieces, because a lot of the really big Harry Potter Hogwarts sets used a lot of these browns. This set might work really well for Lego in that they probably don't have to license anything in this case, compared to licensing Harry Potter or Batman or anything else. Star Wars, would be their biggest license. But yeah, it is kind of ridiculous for me to say I should put the Legos hobby on the back burner and then talk about the newest Lego set, but in a lot of ways that ridiculous price, that ridiculous size is a great example of the kind of sets that are happening too often, and where Lego themselves are not really capable of thinking of medium-sized sets, economical sets. They also I saw someone got some first plays with some of the Pokemon Legos that they look fine, but they don't look particularly great, and they're pushing the smart brick thing, which almost certainly the smart brick thing will be given up on completely in a couple of years. Alright, so again, I don't think the Summer Game Fest news is going to be out yet, since this all ran at 10 in the morning. My macros seem to have run perfectly fine again, with that extra delay timer built into it. So we should be able to go through this fairly quickly and hopefully not have another 4-hour stream today. So yeah, let's go to the Video Games Chronicles. Yeah, the where to watch today's presentations video was the latest video, so we're not going to see any of that. Good. Crimson Desert's latest patch adds a pinball minigame. Version 1.10 also improves re-blockades and lets you mount baby wyverns. I don't know why you would want a pinball minigame in Crimson Desert. It does feel silly. Feels like somebody just made a pinball minigame and they were hoping to make that be part of something separate. I'm a huge fan of pinball, but as I think about it, I don't think a bigger game where you had to play pinball to unlock a door, for instance, makes any sense at all. Obviously, there are pinball games out there where you play a table and then go through a hole at the top of the table to a new table, kind of like Sonic Spinball did. Kind of makes some sense, but that's pinball all the time. Yeah. I can't imagine the idea of pinball as a secondary game mechanic, because it's too complicated of a game feature. Usually a secondary game mechanic is something like lockpicking, something short and not time consuming, something that can't go on forever. Pinball definitely can go on forever. Yeah, and the idea of like being in a big open 3D environment that was a giant pinball table, and then every element of the pinball table was its own pinball table, even that doesn't, I think, really make any sense. Yeah. Although, I kind of like the idea of turtles all the way down, but I don't know what game mechanic that would make sense for. Like, if you were in a giant open world environment that was one big lock, and then each element of the lock was its own part of a locking mechanism, maybe that would work. Or if it was a big pipes game and so you would solve piping, or if it was like wiring but not pipe instead of pipes, although pipes and wiring mini games as a secondary game mechanic are pretty similar, maybe that would make some sense. Yeah, I think wiring probably makes the most sense. That if it was kind of like a Talos Principle thing where you were going to a computer and then you were hacking that computer or rewiring that computer, and then that connected connections to other parts of an island to connect the whole computer, that might work. But yeah, I'm getting very, very far away from the idea of pinball as a secondary game mechanic though. That just seems weird. Moving on, Asha Sharma says she wants Xbox to be the #1 gaming and entertainment company by 2030. Again, I guess it's fine to say that. It does feel like we're seeing a trend here of CEOs not living in reality. Although the subheadline here says the Xbox CEO says, quote, "We are not in a healthy spot, but we will reset the business over the next 100 days." I think we have a counterexample here in that Asha Sharma, even though I question whether she's really calling the shots or not, just by her lack of kicking Mount Booty to the curb and not letting him go on interviews and talk, she does seem like she's living in reality, and she does seem like she is at least exuding the appearance of having a plan. 100 days is an arbitrary number, but a reasonable number too, and she is making changes. It is just questionable as far as whether the changes matter or whether they're just symbolic changes, and whether she really has a plan to make bigger changes. I have to admit, when I think about Xbox, I definitely feel this twinge for a want of a return to glory, where they just go back to somehow making good Gears of War and good Halo games, and they are the Xbox of the Xbox original and Xbox 360 era. But if they did that, they definitely wouldn't be the #1 gaming and entertainment company by 2030. And honestly, they just really can't return the glory. Xbox is going to have to maybe maintain a brand and play into that nostalgia somewhat, but it, very much like Sony, needs new and amazing tentpole games to sell its system and to bring people to its infrastructure. Any success that was to be had for having the Xbox Live subscription has been had at this point. They need to be a game company, not a service company. And Windows certainly is not helping them in any way, but they need to try to leverage gaming on Windows somewhat too. And they can't just rebrand Windows gaming to Xbox gaming on PC and claim a success. Here we have, after this ridiculous mergers, kind of the direction that Xbox is in right now, and that they are attempting to return to Halo and bring back an Halo audience. They're trying to do Activision Call of Duty fandom, Blizzard fandom for Overwatch, and King fandom for, I assume this is Candy Crush. And honestly, they probably don't care about Candy Crush. Not sure they even care about Overwatch that much. Yeah. If I was in charge of Xbox, I would definitely be looking to merge with somebody or partner with a lot of people for a lot of new games. So it'll be interesting when we hit Monday's news to see what the Xbox Direct actually announces and promotes. Although all of those projects would have probably been started before Asha Sharma was in charge, how they're presented will speak a little bit to what this 100 days plan is all about. Next article, quote, "Our console players aren't excited about that," end quote. Xbox's CEO Asha Sharma says it ditched Copilot because it didn't solve a problem. AI tools like neural rendering are still great, still, quote, "a great opportunity," she notes. I don't know what you really mean by neural rendering. I assume that means you're slapping AI on upscaling to make the visuals better, and that's about as much as even on the back end they want to admit to using and want to do. I sure hope we don't get to the point where instead of people in Photoshop having 16K source material images to start with and then scaling it down to like a 4K texture in the final product, that instead people in Photoshop, just to speed up the process by a tiny fraction, are working on 1080p master images and then upscaling it to 4K using AI before the game even is shipped. I hope we don't see that become standard, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is something like that that happens eventually. But yeah, nobody really wants Copilot. And frankly, they've been talking about this idea of getting help and hints and letting other people take control of your game and help you beat the game for years, and they really haven't implemented any of that to a level that anybody has actually tested it out or anything. Like, for all I know, for years you've been able to play for somebody else and help them get past a point, but I've never seen anybody even mention it as a feature, if that's the case. But that certainly was what PlayStation was talking about implementing, and then Xbox was more talking about AIs playing for you. It is not the right way, in my opinion, to solve the problem of people not finishing games, because honestly, the second you let an AI get you past a certain point, then you might as well just put the game in auto mode and let the AI beat the whole game for you, because it's no longer your playthrough at that point. And that if that is what people have to do or choose to do, then I think they're going to very quickly decide they would rather watch a Let's Player do that and have an actual human just play and comment while playing the game. Which undoubtedly the number of games that are actually being played is going down because more people are watching Let's Players play the games instead. Let's see. Steam Machine and Steam Frame have been confirmed for the summer of 2026 by Valve. Valve has provided a fresh update on hardware products. Do we have actual dates? No, it is just now summer. So sometime in the next 3 or 4 months, I would imagine. Also expanding the verified program to include the Steam Machine and Steam Frame, which no duh, they were going to do that. It does seem like they are still planning on putting out the Steam Frame and Steam Machine at the exact same time. At one time it was estimated that it could retail for around $700, but since the announcement, prices have increased by 170% year over year for DRAM. If the estimate of $700 was accurate, and that was a big if, and we had roughly a 150% increase on the Steam Deck, then it's fair to speculate, and this is just speculate, that we can expect a 150% increase from the $700, which that would be another $700 to get you to $1,400, and then $350 more, which would get you to $1,750. So $1,700 and $750 is fairly reasonable high-end guess of what the Steam Machine might be now. Yeah, and I don't think that price would ever really go down. If it is $1,750 for nearly $2,000 for a computer, you're going to see people building computers that are similar, and they're going to be probably about the same price. Then the question, I guess, really is going to come down to, do you think SteamOS and getting away from Windows and having a console-like computer build is worth that price? Because you're paying through the nose for a computer in general. Unfortunately, there will be a lot of considerably less powerful computers out there that will compare whatever price Steam Machine has to be a lot cheaper. Yeah, you're almost certainly going to see a lot of eBay sellers selling really old computers or really underperforming computers for a lot cheaper, and using the Steam Machine price as a contrast. But yeah, that's my guess, is put $2,000 away in savings if you're planning on buying the Steam machine. Now, the Steam frame, can't recommend it to anybody who isn't super rich and wanting to be a beta tester for a new VR headset, knowing that almost certainly VR is never really going to be common enough that it's a thing more than just a small gimmick. Let's see. Xbox CEO says platforms must have exclusive content as she weighs exclusivity shift. Sharma says platforms like Xbox need exclusive content and services. If the platforms are going to continue to lock people in, that is definitely true. And they need to lock people in to succeed and make enough money that they want to make. I wouldn't be surprised if these kinds of conversations have been happening between Xbox and PlayStation, and Xbox has been talking more exclusive content in the sense that they're not going to come to their games are not going to come to the PlayStation as much, and PlayStation's response to that was to say, well, then we're not going to put it on Steam because Windows is what Steam is mostly run on. So it might very well be that PlayStation was slightly pushed. I think mostly it was their own decision, but it might be that PlayStation was slightly pushed to pull back on games being on Steam. Which, in fairness, now, for the games that are available on Steam from PlayStation, I don't know if there's any of them that I really feel the need to play. Like God of War Ragnarok, sure would be nice to play, but with LaFey now drastically changing what God of War is, you're just kind of playing this middle reboot series, and the assumption to make here is that the God of War remakes are not going to come to PC either, so the original God of War or something like the original God of War is not going to be on PC. Horizon, I don't know if there's ever going to be another Horizon game. So then that really just leaves like Spider-Man games as the last ones that really hit my mind as far as what's available on Steam. They never really brought the old. Yeah, I don't think I really want to play Last of Us. I don't think I want to play. They didn't bring the old Uncharted games. Yeah, I think Katamari Damacy and things like that are not under direct control of PlayStation, so those are still probably come to PC. Inherently, PlayStation for a while now has had this habit of changing what their game series were into completely different things. Uncharted was probably the first one to do that. So this new generation of games using names of old games is not very appealing to me, and it seems like they are just doing it again with LaFey. Maybe I'm just a stick in the mud. Somebody made a comparison to LaFey to the Doom reboot, and yeah, the Doom reboot compared to the original Doom is also not the same game. And I would have preferred if the Doom reboot wasn't just called Doom, but was instead called like Doom : The Next Generation or something like that. Something smarter than that. Or Legend of the Doom Slayer or something. Because yeah, the gameplay mechanic in the Doom reboot is really cool. I won't deny that. But it is definitely not the original Doom. Even Doom 2 was not the original Doom, and people didn't really like that. let alone Doom 3, Doom 4. Don't know if there was a Doom 5, but there were 2 versions, I think, of Doom 4. Same is true with Wolfenstein. The original Wolfenstein, completely different than the reboot of Wolfenstein. Those games are very old, so them being rebooted, it was much more tolerable. But they probably should have had different names, even then. So this is a problem that's been happening. Pretty much the only remake of a game that I feel like has been really faithful to the originals is probably the Myst and Riven remake, because that is them just slightly changing the games and polishing them up for modern visuals. And certainly the remakes and remasters of Myst have been considered acceptable because it really isn't changing the gameplay mechanics or the story any. Whereas almost every other remake wants to change the gameplay mechanics, the story. We're starting to see protagonists be changed. We're starting to see locations be changed. And certainly it is the case that when these games come out, they often fail and then have a whole bunch of excuses as to why they fail. The Saints Row reboot is, I think, something people are forgetting too easily as far as a major failure. I don't even think that much is being changed with the Fable reboot, although I still feel like people are going to be unhappy with the changes. And I want to make the comparison and say that movies just don't remake themselves and don't insult art by trying to remake it. But there have been a couple of movies that have been remade. Like, I think Freaky Friday has been remade a couple times and that went by fine. But real big classics, Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Gone with the Wind, Ben-Hur, things like that have not attempted to be remade. Psycho was remade and really proved that there was nothing to be gained by making a shot-for-shot or near shot-for-shot remake of Psycho and just putting it in color, which that is really, I think, the reason why Psycho was remade is that they just wanted to put a new set of actors in those roles and put it in color. But yeah, people notoriously hated the Psycho remake movie. And I don't think we've had any kind of shot-for-shot remake movies of anything else. And there's plenty of movies where it kind of would make some sense to remake them. But it's not going to be shot-for-shot remakes. The Hellraiser reboot on Hulu, definitely going in a completely different direction and probably should have had a different name than just Hellraiser. So that's another one. The Predator Prey sequels, definitely going in different directions. But they have different names and they aren't remakes. They're just sequels. Yeah. I do feel like some of the Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street type movies probably could be remade, but there's not a real value in remaking those specific movies instead of just making a new horror movie that's inspired by those movies. Yeah. And I think that's, I'm rambling here certainly, but I think that's where games should go too, is that why don't we just say make new games with new titles and new series and say they're inspired? Let's stop talking about a Mass Effect 4 and just make a sci-fi game that's inspired by Mass Effect, or make a non-sci-fi game that's inspired by Mass Effect. Yeah. The problem here, I think, and I'll wrap it up here, is that you have far too many corporate entities that have acquired companies, and all they have to show for it is that they own the copyright and trademark on a title, and they don't own any of the actual creative people who made those games or any new creative ideas, because the creative people leave the companies probably before they get acquired. Moving on, the FIFA World Cup 2026 game launches on Netflix June 11th as EA rivalry begins. Interesting. So you're playing this game, it looks like, on your phone via Netflix. How's that work? Yeah, I guess it just works with your phone. It's a shame to have to say that almost certainly this is going to be a laggy, janky experience. I'd like it for the technology to work really well there. But yeah, I don't think that your average home Wi-Fi router is going to be able to get the data and sync the data fast enough to some server that Netflix is running to then present the characters actually moving after you've pressed forward in a short enough time span. There's just going to be a lot of lag, a lot of latency. Almost certainly. And certainly soccer fans, football fans, I think that are really their own niche of gamers that barely, I think, even should be called gamers, because they tend to be, most sports game players focus really exclusively on sports games only, and yeah, they don't really contribute to the larger gaming community or interact with the larger gaming community at all. Moving on, Switch 2 hardware sales dropped 87% week on week in Japan following the price increase. Switch 2 sales had surged in Japan after it was announced the price was going up. That might balance out eventually, but maybe not, because if the majority of the people who bought the Switch 2 bought it when they knew the price was going up and kept it for themselves, then they may very well have hit a saturation point, which weirdly might push Nintendo to rush out a Switch 3 or some new device, because now their hardware sales quarter over quarter is going to start to decline. Now, there is a possibility, certainly, that a lot of the Switch 2s that were bought are actually being bought for crane game operators and more gambling-like parlors in Japan, because giving away Switch 1s and Switch 2s as a prize in some of those gambling type things was very much a default major prize giveaway. And I don't know what you would replace a Switch 1 or Switch 2 with as your major prize. Yeah. So it would be very believable if 87% of the sales of the previous week were just crane game stores buying out Switch 2s with the extra cash they might have to then have people gamble for it, because I imagine it's hugely profitable that even a $500 Switch 2 might get several people gambling for it to to the point where you're earning $1,000 or more to win before you actually have to give away one Switch 2. The Japanese only one isn't even that expensive in the price. So it might just also show the Japanese are very price sensitive. So 312 to 374 feels like a small price rise compared to the Steam Deck price rise at this point. Moving on, Elden Ring Tarnished Edition on Switch 2 is finally has a confirmed release date. It's planned for 2025, but delayed for performance reasons, which weirdly does show that even kind of an old game like Elden Ring, which is weird to call Elden Ring an old game, might still be in some sort of launch cycle. In that there's always the Switch 2 or the Switch 1 to try and port your game to as your last platform of note. Switch 2 sold 1 million units in the UK, 30 weeks faster than the Switch did. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know why anybody is buying a Switch 2 at this point. It's like Mario Kart World is not that exciting. Donkey Kong Bonanza sure was exciting. I didn't hear anybody even really mention or review the latest Metroid Prime game. The Star Fox 64 remake can't be that exciting of a game. Weirdly, it's Pokemon Pokopia and Tamagotchi Life that I've heard the most talk about. There's a new Pokemon game, I guess, coming out eventually, but I don't think it's out yet. And I think Pokemon XY had a Switch 1 version. Yeah, I think people are probably wasting their money on Switch 2s, but who knows. Moving on, CD Projekt Red says its new IP, Hadar, will be an emotional open world experience that will stay with gamers. That is interesting phrasing, but it tells you pretty much nothing. New job ad sheds more light on the Witcher and Cyberpunk Studios mystery project. If this screenshot is telling us anything, we have something all and then got milk and neon, and so it feels like this is going to be set kind of in the 80s 90s time. We all hats. Yeah, I don't know what this is supposed to be as far as a screenshot, and frankly trying to dig details out of it probably is stupid because the game could never even come out, or it could be completely different. I think, though, we need to take a step back from CD Projekt Red, and we need to say that far too many people have been on CD Projekt Red's hype train for far too long, and the reality is Cyberpunk 2077 took a really long time to get good as a game, and even as a game, good is not really great. Witcher 3 was great pretty much at launch. That was their big success. But Witcher 1 and Witcher 2 are pretty rough, and they aren't remaking those games or remastering those games, which I wouldn't mind a soft reboot to try and retell Geralt of Rivia's story from the Witcher 3 perspective and a Geralt of Witcher 3 to make him more likable, because frankly Geralt of Rivia was not very likable in Witcher 1 and Witcher 2. Witcher 4 already has people concerned to some extent, mostly not because it's a female protagonist, as many people will dismiss complaints, but mostly because it's bringing back the character whose story had already been satisfactorily wrapped up, and so there is just no real desire to bring back that character instead of introducing a new character. Cyberpunk doesn't really have a main protagonist. It has Johnny Silverhand, so I guess he probably will show up in the next Cyberpunk game, or somebody like him, and then it will be create your own character. It is kind of interesting how Cyberpunk has you create your own characters, and then Witcher is very much not allowing you to create your own characters. But yeah, you have a fantasy game, you have a sci-fi game, a reality-based or nostalgia-based 80s game does seem like that would be a genre to fall in the middle of it. But the thing I've been dancing around here is I just don't trust CD Projekt Red. I think there's probably been some brain drain there. I think they got lucky with Witcher 3 being a great game. I think they really struggled to make Cyberpunk a great game and put a lot of effort into it, and I don't think they can afford to do that forever. They are probably due a flop, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is the flop, as they shove a ton of energy and money in Witcher 4 to make it not be a flop. So yeah, I definitely would suggest not getting on the hype train of a new CD Projekt game when they really are only half proven as even being good at making games. Yeah, I would very much suggest cautious optimism in all things, but particularly when it comes to CD Projekt Red. It's very believable that they would just become the next Bethesda that takes forever to create games and then they're not even that good, or they would become the next Gearbox that just makes sequels that are worse and worse each time. Yeah. As the summer has been going on, I've been monitoring my air conditioner and electricity bill, and boy, it seems like literally changing 1 degree went from using about 33 kilowatt hours a day to 54 kilowatt hours a day. So yeah, I probably am going to have to move it up hotter by a couple of degrees just to balance things out. Although in fairness, it's not like my fans are spinning at their highest speeds, and I have digital ceiling fans that have like 10 speeds that they can spin at, so I should really in the summer have them at their maximum speed and have the air conditioner cool the house. Although it is also going to have just a humongous amount of humidity, but yeah, my air conditioner just really does a terrible job of getting humidity out of my house anyway, so if I can reduce the amount the air conditioner runs and then run a humidifier, that might actually balance out. Although probably running a humidifier, a dehumidifier, not a humidifier, that would make it worse, will use way more electricity and be a lot less efficient. But we'll see. Of course, none of that has anything to do with video games. The no rest for the Wicked director says the Xbox version won't release alongside PS5 because Series S is making that rough. PlayStation 5 gets the game in October, with Xbox and Switch 2 coming at a later date. We are starting to see increased pressure to abandon the Series S, less powered Xbox. And in fairness, I don't know if the Series S is really doing anything for Xbox at this point, because everything is just so expensive. It does feel to me like if you are going to announce a price increase for the Series S, you might as well just cancel the Series S and buy in bulk to make the Series X. It also may be the case that there is just no real need to try and push for digital only consoles. Although it is interesting to point out that the Steam Machine doesn't have a CD-ROM slot. So even if you could cram a CD-ROM into it, or well, Blu-ray player at this point, the only way you could do that is if it was like sitting on top of the Steam Machine with a USB-C plug in the back, or sitting next to it. And that really is just the future I think that we need to go with, is screw any kind of like internal security thing they're trying to do to keep people from ripping discs or cloning discs, and just have external drives, which honestly, it's not that different to get to the internal wires. The only difference is they probably are doing like a trusted platform module thing on CD-ROM drives, Blu-ray drives in PlayStations and Xbox Series X's. But yeah, if I was in charge of Xbox, I'd seriously consider canceling the Series S, saying that we're canceling this so we can maintain the price of the Series X, and we're coming out with a Series X that is going to be diskless, and that will be the base model to replace the Series S, and there will be an expansion of $100 to have an external USB drive plugged into it. Or you move completely away from spinning discs, which maybe is starting to make more sense, and you have the SD Express standard that is in the Switch 2 become the new standard, and then it's just little micro SD Express cards being plugged into the PlayStation and Series X. I would prefer still to have spinning discs though, so you can play movies, like physical media, still coming out in weird reasons. And yeah, I imagine there will be some of those kind of sales during the next Prime Day sale. Let's see, Nintendo is releasing a revised Switch 2 and possibly controllers with replaceable battery in Europe. EU legislation says new models have to be compliant from February 2027. Okay, that's great. it'll be very interesting to see what the physical form factor there will be to replace the batteries. And yeah, I'm not sure if they really have to replace the batteries for the controllers versus game consoles. The law may carve out exceptions or longer delays. And I'm not sure how easy it has to be to replace the battery either. It might very well be that a lot of devices just say, okay, you need to get this screwdriver and take out these 27 screws and take out these 27 pieces to replace the battery, then you can replace the battery and put it all back together. Yeah, they got very much too concerned about kids in particular, swallowing batteries to the point where it allowed manufacturers to just cram rechargeable batteries into everything, which created a lot more problems and e-waste. Like ideally, I would like to see a little back panel with like one screw that you unscrew to take out the battery and the switch to and replace it easily, and then put the screw back on. Just like one screw at most. Let's see. The release date for Respawn's strategy game Star Wars Zero Company is leaked ahead of the Summer Games Fest gameplay reveal. The EA published game is reportedly only a couple months away. I feel like this is the first I've even heard of this game. Although in fairness, a Star Wars game really is not going to catch my attention that much. Yeah. And so yeah, this is our last Video Games Chronicle article for today. We're going to have probably a ton of them. I didn't know Lucasfilm Games still existed, and I guess it does a name at least. So what I want to do after this trailer plays is I'm gonna take a short bathroom break, and then we'll come back and go through the Gematsu articles. Yeah, the amount of cutscenes here makes me feel like the actual gameplay might be much closer to something like what you're seeing here in the holograms, and that all of this cutscenes is really just teaser trailer stuff. But I don't think they'd show something like that. Now the implication is that you're going to be running around shooting like that. Yeah. But yeah, this is a turn-based positional placement strategy game, which as a category of games is still one I've never been interested in playing. Yeah. Alright, well, I'll take a break and I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. I scrolled through my YouTube feed and saw that several of the announcements of the games have come out. Not really too much that I could talk about those games yet, but it does look like they're going to be releasing Resident Evil Code Veronica, a Saw game, Saw Genesis, I believe is the name of that, a new Star Wars game, and probably several other things that I overlooked as far as teasers and trailers. Of course, I didn't watch any of the trailers, and these are all just announcements for games that could be coming out 6 years from now, if they ever come out. And so, yeah, we will talk more about those on Monday, I imagine, and go through the trailers. Again, very much anti-hype train recommendations here. Just don't get on the hype train for games that aren't coming out anytime soon. There's plenty of games out right now that people haven't played. There's no need to start thinking about tomorrow. Excuse me. Yeah. So let's go through the Komatsu articles we do have. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Endless Ragnarok, Meet the Crew, Fedio, or Fedel. Check out this article if you're really interested. It's an anime monster demon girl, succubus probably, from the looks of it. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. I did go through and change the code so that it would open games with Steam links, and yeah, apparently you can't use break in JavaScript, or at least you can't in this instance. Break is used as a command to break out of a loop and just stop the execution of everything and just say, hey, break out of this loop, go to the end, stop doing anything altogether. The general idea was I was telling it to break after the first time, or the second time to, oh, well, after the first time really was how I was trying it the first time, that it opened the Steam link. That way it doesn't open 25 Steam links from one article. I rewrote it, so it should be able to do that now. I just established a variable. The variable starts at 1 or 0 and then increments up, and then it only opens links when that variable is below a certain number. Which, yeah, took me 2 tries to get that to work because of her parentheses being in the wrong place. But the general thought should be now that at most 2 links will be opened from any articles, and we won't get ridiculous long lists of hundreds of games or 25 games being opened, which will save us a little bit of time every time we see the top 100 games being played on Steam Deck or things like that. EA Sports College Football 27 launches July 9th for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. I should also mention that I've turned my fan all the way up to 10. It was at 4 before, and I'm going to just see how well I can tolerate that. It is fairly noisy in the microphone and in my ears, but there is also noise reduction going on, so I wouldn't be surprised if you're hearing nothing when I go silent. Yeah, so I don't know. People would have to tell me if you can hear the fan going on there. Like, for all I know, the computer fans always was doing that too. Now, ceiling fans only make humans cooler. They don't make computers cooler. If that's a concern, they don't make houses cooler or anything, or electronics cooler. Ceiling fans just blow air over the skin of humans, which causes the sweat to evaporate on humans faster, which causes them to feel cooler. But that should work for this scenario. That is also the reason why you should turn off ceiling fans when you leave a room, because it is literally not only wasting electricity but making the room hotter, because the engine, the motor in a ceiling fan, yeah, it's not really an engine, is producing heat as it spins, like all electronic devices do. So yeah, they used to say don't turn TVs off, but that was the old TV technology. Nowadays you might as well turn TVs off and electronics and things like that off when leaving a room. It's just going to save electricity in the long run. Do I care about college football to put it on the fall list? No, I don't think I do. Although I do think when it comes down to it, college football might be the kind of football that's getting more popular as people are getting bored and upset with NFL more and more. There is a weirdness here, and it seems like there's a mode where people can just all be in the mascot outfits. Which that would certainly be weird if that was the way football was actually played, is that people who are just in these mascot outfits, they would not really be that much more cushioned, and they probably would pass out from heat stroke even more, because these are just giant insulators. Yeah. College football, frankly, might also be still somewhat restrained as far as the amount of impacts and the rugged aggression compared to NFL. And NFL really doesn't want to reduce the rugged aggression, but at this point, maybe their audience, to retain their audience or grow a new audience, they should reduce the impacts severely. Moving on, Blue Ridge Hunting launches in early access in August. You face off against cryptids based on real Appalachian legends and folklore. I've actually been surprised there hasn't been more of that, and apparently this is a woman-led Games Fest announcement, so we got a couple of them. Yeah. Perhaps the cryptids are not as established or as known, but there's enough of them, enough of myths to definitely feel like there should have been more games where the monster was something like Bigfoot or Mothman, the Jersey Devil, things like that. There was a whole kind of like TV show, probably 4 or 5 of them, around hunting cryptids. Supernatural certainly could have gone deeper in that direction too. Yeah. Particularly with the success of just like completely new made up monsters like the Backrooms. And in the case of the Backrooms, a lot of that seemingly being made up by singular people, or Loop 8 definitely being made by a singular group of people. There is definitely room for more video games to seek out new kinds of monsters instead of the same old zombies. But I imagine one of the reasons why we don't see that much is because it is just so easy to be lazy and have zombies be your enemy and then go to the asset store and get a model for a zombie. It's a lot harder to have to 3D model and create your own Mothman. Let's see. Puppergeist adds a Switch version and launches July 16th. It's a rhythm visual novel. I don't recall hearing about this before, but apparently I have seen it because it's on my follow list. It definitely has a different kind of art style. Yeah. I kind of feel like this art style should be the Western art style that appears way more often than it does. Apparently we saw this all the way back in October of 2025, which I think in particular that goes to show just how long the delay can be for some of these games. A 2D hand-drawn survival horror game, Moonlight Pale, has been announced for PC. What happened to the last 2D drawn game is a very valid question to ask. Forgotten Anne, I think, was the name of that one. I think it came out. It may still not be out. Nope. Now, what does 2D hand-drawn really mean? Because I think the reality is that there isn't anybody that has the time to actually fully 2D animate things from scratch and then scan in each of those cells. I just don't think that's what they mean when they say 2D art anymore. Even if you were having people like in Korea animate it for you, I think there's still software that's going to be made. And certainly when we see the gameplay, that is a sprite that is cycling between just a couple of frames. You can look at the feet just jumping from one to the other, which, yeah, each of those individual sprites might have been mostly drawn in a 2D style, but almost certainly it was drawn on a computer using sprite software. And inherently, compared to Forgotten Anne, that looks not as good. Like it does not feel like a prestige animation there. It looks like you're going to get a few cutscenes and then you're going to have the chibi sprite characters most of the time, which is pretty commonplace. It may very well also be the case now that when a game is selling itself as being 2D art, unless it looks incredibly good, it probably just means they don't have any other sales point to point out, and they are probably not creating a great quality product. Let's see, a Skyset romance adventure game, Crosswinds, has been announced for PC. Yeah. Inherently, for me, a presentation and event, a Summer Game Fest showcase of showcases is just not necessary. If you follow Gamatsu, you get fairly consistent announcements and trailers for new games all the time, and so bundling it all together for one big event just overwhelms the likes of me, but I think it probably overwhelms most people. This game could have something to it. I wouldn't say the visuals look amazingly good. Maybe I don't like the style, but also I imagine there's just kind of not much there. And then I have to definitely question just playing games in the first place, as far as whether you actually are going to even be flying the plane or not, because the description here is seemingly like you can fly, but then it looked like a pretty empty area. And then it seems like it has some kind of visual novel love and life choices, and then a cozy cafe vibe. Which, yeah, anything cozy at this point is just irritating me whenever I see that phrase, because it frankly means nothing other than simplistic gameplay mechanic that's going to be boring. At some point, if I would prefer games just not have gameplay mechanics and get away from the idea of cozy and just give me a visual novel if you're really just trying to give me a visual novel. Yeah, and at some point maybe there is a percentage of game developers that are just trying to convince more people to play visual novels without realizing that they're playing visual novels. Moving on, a 2.5D action-adventure and colony building hybrid, Ghostless, has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. So, certainly when we get announcements of games, you get some weird combinations too. Adventure / colony builder building hybrid. Yeah. But yeah, that could be something, but it certainly could also be nothing. I was going through my backlog of YouTube videos I want to watch, which is way too long, and I saw a video that was interesting talking about a Fallout Brotherhood of Steel game for consoles that is pretty much considered non-canon and totally forgotten about and actively not discussed. Yeah, and it was like a game that came out after Fallout 2 from Interplay, before Interplay really just failed completely and got so desperate they had to sell the game to Bethesda. But yeah, it's not a particularly interesting game, and it's nothing like Fallout 1 or 2, and it is not in any of the complete collections that they've since released of Fallout games. So yeah, if it had any real value, you might want to emulate it on consoles and try and play it there, but it doesn't. It plays completely different, and it has a completely different feel. It's an edgelord, all the characters with big boobs, all the female characters have big boobs game that just is playing heavy metal type music, rock music, ska music type stuff, instead of the 1950s music you would expect in a Fallout game with the 1950s type sentimentality. But yeah, I would say it's probably worth learning about if you're interested in the old Fallout games. It is weird that the best Fallout game is Fallout New Vegas, made by a completely different team from who's made Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and any future Fallout games, likely. But yeah, Fallout as a series has had more misses than hits, and yet it still has a fandom and people coming back to it. Although I don't know if people are really going to be super enthusiastic about a Fallout 5 unless it changes things drastically. And I don't think Bethesda plans to really change anything desperately. We probably won't even see a new Fallout game until the Elder Scrolls game comes out, which I don't expect that to be very different from Skyrim, despite the large amount of time between the two. Anyways, I'm off topic. Let's move on. Here's that game, Crosswinds. Yeah, it kind of has like a French art style to it. I'm getting French from that for some reason. Ghostless is weird because you have this like robot head, and then you have a real robot head. But the actual game screenshots are really low res sprites. Yeah. Let's see. Kernel Hearts launches in September. Kernel spelled the way a computer kernel would be spelled, I would think. That's the only thing that's spelled that way. Well, or popcorn kernel. It's a blend of action RPG and roguelike elements with multiplayer co-op. Yeah. Anime girls with swords. Hell Clock for the PS5 and Xbox Series launches July 14th alongside a Cursed War expansion, which would make me assume it's already out on Steam. I don't recognize the game, but it is rated very positively, and yeah, June of 2025. And a single player game with a 24-hour peak of 330 people is not terrible after being out for a long time. Let's see, Magical Blush for PC launches in September. It's a top-down action adventure game. Let's see if there's a Steam page. Yes. It's not out yet. Could be something, could be nothing. Time travel Metroidvania first-person shooter Tempest Vitae has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, and PC. Well, certainly there could be something. It at least is trying to do something fairly weird. The Adventures of Elliot, the Millennium Tales, has a making of video on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. We're still waiting for that game to come out. Colorbound launches in August. That's, I think, a puzzle game. Casual puzzle game where I think the case is you can only land on certain colors as platforms. Still waiting for it to come out. Gunny Ascend launches this fall. Gunny is a weird name. It seems to be, it might be part of a coalition of independent game developers because we see Shovel Knight here and several other things that I might have been able to identify as from other games, characters from other games. A Japanese puppetry inspired platform fighter called Bunraku has been announced for the PS5, Switch 2, and PC. The PC playtest is now available. I do want to see what this looks like, so let's watch this trailer. Yeah, I saw another video talking about Golden Bat, which was like probably the prototype of the first superhero character ever. It's this golden skeleton-like creature in a black cape. Bat, as in like vampire bat type appearance, and Golden Bat was pre-anime, so people would go on the sides of streets and they would improv stories, and they'd have a little box with some hand-drawn images of the characters, and they would tell tales, including characters like Golden Bat. Golden Bat eventually did have an anime based on it, but as of like January this year is now completely public domain in the United States and probably around the world. But yeah, very old. I definitely have seen Golden Bat around and never really understood why it would have been so popular. But it certainly makes sense if it was popular pre-TV, pre-animation anime. It would have been popular with a generation before. And yeah, it's kind of easy to forget the rich theater history of Japan, and frankly even around the world, rich theater histories that existed before radio, before TV, where if you wanted to be entertained, you were going to see some kind of live action performer doing a unique performance that would be done live each night. Here's Gunny Ascend. Looks kind of like a Tetris game, frankly. I wasn't expecting that. And this actually just looks like a platform fighting game, player versus player, so it's actually not that exciting. Alright, well that brings us to gaming on Linux, which there might be a decent argument to not spending too much time on gaming on Linux on Monday, because we'll spend so much time with all the new announcements for new games. Yeah. I'm still trying to learn how to coax people into talking on Discords, and unfortunately no conversation is really happening on my Discord where I'd like it to happen, so it could be slightly better, a lot better organized. Let's not even say slightly. But yeah, for the most part it is so much the case that if I post anything I either get no response or I get very bland responses that don't continue a conversation. I don't feel like people have the ability to converse anywhere as much as they might have in the past, but maybe people in general didn't actually have the ability to converse in the past even. But yeah, it may be me, but it may very well just be that the one Discord I'm trying is also fairly dead. Maybe I should try a much more visited place. Unfortunately, I do think places like Reddit or even Facebook have systems that make it kind of impossible to really converse with people. Like Reddit, it's just people downvoting anything they don't agree with. Facebook, it's people who are your friends, which or friends or family, which tend to not be that many people that actually want to have conversations. Like, people generally don't want to talk to their friends, well, to their family. Friends, yes, I guess you kind of do, but maybe not on Facebook. And yeah, you have to be pretty old to be on Facebook at this point. Anyways, I'm rambling. Humble choice for June 2026 brings Octopath Traveler 2 and Citizen Sleeper 2. So this would be an example of where Octopath Traveler 2 and Citizen Sleeper 2 should be open, but Life is Strange, Double Exposure, Riftbreaker, Indica, Hell Clock, Construction Simulator, and Overloading should not be. Let's see what happens there. Well, I don't think I have any links open. Interesting. I don't know what happened there. The IGN Live Bundle 2026 has some very highly rated games to grab. Control Ultimate Edition, a game called Off. I've never even heard of Off. Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew, The Last Campfire, Toem, A Photo Adventure, Paradise Killer Perfect 25 Edition, Blair Witch, Fear the Spotlight, and Roller Drome. Those are fairly unrecognizable games with the exception of Control. I wonder if they're reviewed well. And in this case, Control Ultimate Edition is open. And then Off is available, and I have this on the follow list. I should put it on the wish list even though I'm iffy about the visuals. Then Octopath Traveler should be the link to the previous tab. Yeah. So yeah. In that system worked well, although it doesn't make the that much sense to open just the first two links when there's a list of links, but it also doesn't make a lot of sense to just open all the links, because that really is just a waste of time. So yeah, Gaming on Linux says the new Steam Store homepage is here with improved gamepad navigation. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, definitely is the case that they are thinking of the Steam Store to be used first and foremost on something with a gamepad. I'm not sure if the Steam Store on a web page would have gamepad navigation though. That is an interesting experiment we might do in the next few streams. Let's just pull out the gamepad and see if you can actually browse a web page at all. That is an interesting question. I don't know if like the newest version of HTML, which I think is still HTML5 or JavaScript or anything like that, can hook for specific key presses or can hook for gamepad input at all. I kind of think it can't. So unless there was some kind of new hidden input box that you click the mouse into and then it could capture all of that, I don't know how gamepads would work. It is possible that Firefox or Chrome might have ways in which gamepads are just treated the same as pressing up, down, left, and right on the keyboard. But even that, I imagine, won't be a great gaming experience. It certainly wouldn't be left trigger, right trigger stuff. It wouldn't be force feedback vibration. Wouldn't be any kind of gyro or anything. So yeah, you may very well only really experience the gamepad navigation on Steam on a Steam machine or a Steam Deck, where the client itself is interpreting gamepad inputs to something else. Full article here says Steam Deck / Big Picture mode users rejoice. The newer Steam homepage has been fully upgraded and rolled out to everyone now. This newer design brings Steam more in line with what they're doing across the rest of the store. And since they've added quite a lot of things over the years, they needed to clean it up a bit to actually make use of some of what they've added. Like the mouse highlight over recommendations, the pop-up UI will give you some more clear information about it without having to go direct to the game page. You also notice sections for games on sale from your wish list, and recommended DLC are sticking around permanently now instead of just during sales events. So that definitely shows that they want you to think about buying games on every day you visit the front page, not just when there's a big sale. And the fancy personalized release calendar they made is actually showcased on the homepage now too. Everything should just look better thanks to higher resolution game art. I wouldn't be surprised though if with all these tweaks the amount of space and storage that it's using is going up. So this gives you a general idea of what probably a wider than 1080p screen sees in their screenshot. Which I guess he's showing also his friend name if you want to try and friend the Gaming on Linux guy. I don't know a real reason why you'd want to do that. But yeah, it looks like he probably has an ultra wide monitor. Yeah, and then yeah, it doesn't really look that different from the way mine does with the vertical format. It is cramming more and more into the screen, and it is reducing the banners. I think the blue is probably getting another shade darker every time they change it, and even if the blue isn't getting darker, you're seeing less and less of the blue theme and more of individual thumbnails standing out and being part of the focus. Finally, as well, the store might not be quite so terrible on the Steam Deck SteamOS and desktop big picture mode. Valve has said there's been significant improvements to navigation for anyone using a gamepad, which is good to see. So sure it took a while though. At least when the Steam machine finally releases this summer, it might not see so many complaints about shopping for new games on it. Yeah, and the blog post announcement is available if you want to check that out. I don't think it's necessary to check it out. The Cool desktop environment, Cool with a K, has turned 30 years old, and they probably regret naming it the Cool desktop environment at that point with a K, which is why most people only call it KDE. This October, KDE will turn 30, and they're celebrating with extra funding drive to try and attract more regular donation support. Which the more funding KDE gets, I imagine the longer they can continue to work on KDE, and it works fairly well. Big changes happening in Linux in general, but KDE in particular is pushing a lot of those big changes to move to Wayland and improve Wayland so that it is the new desktop compositor of choice, and a better desktop compositor compared to the X server, which has been around for a very, very long time. Let's see, SteamOS version 3.8.7 beta brings improvements for Intel handhelds, audio popping, and other fixes. That is one thing. Every time I turn off my Steam Deck, a video is always playing from Emulation Station, and the audio does just really struggle to just turn off the audio and mute itself before shutting down, which I don't see a real reason why it should be doing that and struggling that way. Definitely feels like it'd be fairly easy that when you initiate the shutdown service, you would mute the audio first before anything else. It is certainly still nice to see improvements happening on SteamOS. The idea of Intel handhelds that exist now getting more support is interesting, in particular because they are also Intel announced a new chip set for mobile handhelds. So yeah, there is a small possibility that we'll be seeing handhelds worth talking about that do have Intel CPUs in them instead of AMD CPUs in them. SteamOS apparently has run into specific problems with TCL TVs using the Steam Deck dock. Yeah. Then generic improvements and fixes. Moving from KDE Plasma 6.4.3 or to 4.3 from 2.5, 6.2.5, and now using Wayland by default is a pretty big change. But unfortunately, that probably is about the class of new features that will be implemented on SteamOS. I'm not really expecting anything huge otherwise. Yeah. It is an interesting thought as far as if you plugged in an external hard drive and tried to move games or install games to that external hard drive on SteamOS. Is there anything weird that happens when that happens? Is there something that helps you do something like that? Because that would be one of the few features that might interest people, is if it was just really easy. But I imagine it's probably not super easy, but it's probably not that hard too. I imagine it's just you plug in an external hard drive, then you make a sim link to a new folder, which maybe would require you to root your Steam Deck, which is not that hard to do. Yeah. They've even added a setting for a desktop password in the developer settings, although that desktop password may very well not be a root password. And then they're upping the Linux kernel, but the big Linux kernel change it will be when they go to 7.0, and even then it may not be very impressive changes. And of course, a ton of this is just like too technical to really mean much of anything. Steam Machine and Steam Frame are shipping this summer. Valve now rolling out verification system, which would make me assume if they are rolling out a verification system, they have at least a few test machines in their own offices, if not test prototype dev consoles for game developers. Yeah, again, if you were going to put a spinning drive here, it actually would probably be longer than the total length of the Steam Machine. You probably don't want it on top of the Steam Machine because there's probably a fan blowing air up that direction. So it would just be a USB drive on the side or in front of it. But you could probably do something cool where the Steam Machine sat on top of the spinning disk drive and there was a dock in front of it for the controller to charge on. If you got really fancy with the design. Still really have no interest in the Steam frame. Although, at some point if the Steam frame was cheap, I might consider it. And I am slightly intrigued to see if the controls do anything new, but they haven't really talked about the new controls, so I assume they aren't doing anything new. Moving on, here's what's coming to GeForce Now in June, including the NTE Neverness to Everness, Spacecraft, and Gothic 1 Remake. There's a whole list here of GeForce Now streaming games, which, yeah. I just don't think there's too much reason to even talk about GeForce Now. Sorry, I'm shifting myself in the chair. I've increasingly, as I've been playing these chess games, I've started to just lean forward, put my feet on the ground, and move the microphone at a kind of 45-degree angle, which probably sounds a little bit different, but I imagine not that different. But yeah, I have really realized that if I don't want to be in a massive amount of pain and taking pain pills, I need to, after a couple hours, just shift my position. Fate Keeper Early Access. Out now. Mostly positive, but it's all I can really do is leave it on the follow list. From the Fruit Ninja devs, build the perfect sequence of individual shots in the Bullet Hell gun crypt. That was one of the things about Pawnbarian, is that it kind of felt like maybe there should be a puzzle mode to it, or that the starting positions of the enemies might be puzzly, but I kind of don't think it was. I think it was pretty random. Pawnbarian probably would have benefited from some puzzle modes. I don't think it would have benefited from like daily quest or anything like that, but specific characters moving in specific directions to just learn how to play would have helped maybe a little bit. Usually in chess games you do have some puzzle modes where you make one move to win, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 moves to win. Yeah, the House Flipper Remastered Collection is already mixed. I was holding on to this just to see what the reviews were, and yeah, I definitely thought there was a chance that this would happen, that people would be either unsatisfied with the remaster aspect of it, or think that it's overpriced, or that it's unnecessary to effectively remaster a game that looked fine and put a whole bunch of DLC together just so you can force players to pay more money. So let's go down to the negative reviews and see what the complaints are. I wouldn't be surprised if it performs poorly too. Optimization sucks. There are multiple visual glitches, especially when changing time cycles. Overall, it seems like a cash grab. It should have been free for DLC owners. If you can get this on loyalty discount like I did, go for it, but at full price, I'd hold off until the first major patch. The game looks much better, but the progression is messy. They unlock all the maps from the start, but didn't account for tools. I got stuck on a pool job because the shovel refused to unlock. Turns out you have to guess which specific garden DLC job unlocks at first, forcing you to leave contracts unfinished. On top of that, the duplicator tool glitched out so bad during the job I couldn't delete the copied items and had to leave the property and come back to reset it. Add in the old window washer tool still zipping across the window when using a controller, and the fact that you can't sample duplicate existing wall tiles, so you have to stifle through It feels a bit unpolished for a remastered edition, thus far the game runs good aside for some obvious need for polish on textures and optimizations. You don't need this remaster. Textures look worse, shadows are weirdly shiny, and there's some inexplicable design decisions, like how a cleaning tool, a brush, and later a Swiffer style contraption has an unappealing dripping animation. I also disagree with their statement that the UI being more intuitive feels much more cluttered and laborious to use than in the original game. Alright, so it does seem like it's an unnecessary bundle. And I think I maybe don't have the DLC of House Flipper originally, so I don't think I'm getting any kind of loyalty discount here. Let's click on this bundle info and see where it goes. Like 4% discount seems like nothing. And this DLC, I assume, is DLC for the original House Flipper. So, in a weird way, I guess the thing is you would have to go and buy the original DLC for the original House Flipper, and then maybe that would discount this more than 10%, but maybe not. Yeah. Let's go and look at House Flipper 2. House Flipper 2, in contrast, is very positive. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything really new to say there. Like, seems like the real savings and the real smart move is just to get the original game on sale and the original DLC if you really like the game. But part of the thing too is why I may not have gotten the DLC for a game like this is that I want to play just the original experience that is probably going to be a little bit smaller and a little bit more linear instead of having several DLC areas that I could jump around to and get confused. So yeah, this will be a very interesting one to keep on the follow list, but it is teetering between mostly positive at 71% and being mixed. Yeah. Let's see, here's that game Kernel Hearts, which apparently we've already got on the follow list. Which, yeah, it's kind of hard to know anything looking at these screenshots. Could be something, I would assume probably not, though. It is going into one of the more recent fetishes that has been around amongst anime girls, or been talked about more amongst anime fans in the past couple of years, which is the armpit fetish, which, yeah, that's one that doesn't really make a ton of sense to me, and it's always completely shaved or hairless armpits of anime girls. And I'll just leave it at that since I really have nothing else to say there. To each their own, I suppose. Ace Combat 8 Wings of Thieves takes to the skies on October 1st. Yeah. It's been a while, I think, since there was an Ace Combat game. This might be the fly around fighting game worth playing, if there is a fly around fighting game worth playing. Gun Crypt. Put down the follow list. I think we already saw that. Let's see. KDE Plasma waves goodbye to X11. That's the X server for Plasma 6.8. KDE developer David Edmondson has blogged about the upcoming purge of X11 as KDE Plasma moves to a Wayland-only world. As previously announced last world, KDE Plasma is doing away with the X11 session as Linux world moves on fully towards Wayland. And now Edmondson has a blog post update to talk a little bit about moving forward. It'll be interesting to see if there is any large list of apps that run into problems. Anything that doesn't update itself will be handled with X Wayland, which they say most apps will continue to work as normal. At some point, even X Wayland, I imagine, is going to be eliminated, but who knows, it might be there for legacy reasons for decades from now. Their own internal metrics within KDE show over 95% of users of Plasma 6.6 are already on Wayland, with it gradually increasing with each release. So this will really only affect a small minority of holdouts. Basically no one is testing or developing Plasma on X11 anymore, so you pretty much have to move anyway. The Arduino code for Arduino has updated itself to a newer version based off of the ESP IDF, or at least some of the code is based off of the ESP IDF, which probably won't change too much, but yeah, it might break some really specific Arduino code. Although if you're making real programs to run on microcontrollers, you probably shouldn't be using Arduino's code anyways. It's older code and it's simplistic code for kids to learn. For STEM reasons, it's really more of an educational programming IDE than a final product IDE. And yeah, I really start to question now whether any of the push towards STEM has had any success or beneficial events there too. Like, maybe it encouraged some people to get into science, but also maybe it just was a distraction as far as Raspberry Pi and Arduino type programming, because none of that is stuff you're really going to do in a future job market, more than likely. I doubt there are too many engineers out there that are building anything with an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi at this point, because they're just better solutions. Yeah. I don't know though. I could be totally wrong. And I definitely like the idea of STEM being pushed and science, technology, engineering, and mathematics being pushed, but perhaps the science and technology and all of that should be much closer to what people actually do in those job fields, or in job fields that are actually going to exist by the time the kids grow up, instead of being simplified projects that really don't connect to the reality of the situation. It's kind of my same feeling with like Scratch programming language that Apple created, where it's Lego programming. It's just too simple of programming that you'll never actually do in a job environment. You're not going to program something in Scratch. You're probably not going to even program something in HTML. You might do JavaScript or Python, but probably not. If you're going to be a real programmer, you're almost certainly going to need to know C++, C#, .NET level programming, or jump ahead of the class and learn Rust. But yeah, I would probably push people directly into .NET or Rust programming at this point and not try to teach them any language before then, because that will just lead to confusion. And I definitely think mathematics should rewrite the way they write things, so it's more like computer programming and less like random symbols that nobody understands other than mathematicians. Let's see. Moving on. The Steam survey for May is out. Linux is down 3.99%, but still above macOS. Notice how gaming on Linux is trying to turn a negative into a positive. The overall operating system stats for May show an increase for Windows, a decrease for Linux, and an increase for macOS. Steam Decks being unavailable almost certainly affect some of that. Yeah. So you can see when the first Steam Deck was released, the blue Linux started to kind of go up a little bit higher, but really it wasn't until almost the Steam Deck OLED was released that you see a real spike. But Linux itself was just trending higher because of becoming Windows 10 end of life. And then, yeah, when Windows 10 end of life happened, you saw weirdly a drop down on Linux use and then a huge spike on Linux use. And right now we're still kind of high, but I mean the scale is also 30%, so it's not like 50% of Windows users went and moved to Linux or even Mac OS. There's still a massive number of people who just bought a new computer and had Windows 11 on it, and they are just putting up with Windows 11 because they don't have time or energy to learn a new operating system, or at least they feel like they don't have time or energy to learn a new operating system, and they would rather be forced to learn a new operating system in Windows 11 than anything else. And as far as distros go, the one to pay attention to is probably the yellow other. That doesn't really tell us anything. But yeah, SteamOS Halo is kind of going downward. And then Arch-based in general, which I imagine includes CachyOS, is going up. And Fedora-based ones, I guess, is Bazzite. I don't know why Flatpak would be its own separate operating system. But yeah, Bazzite, if it's Fedora based, is going up, but it's actually kind of low. Yeah, maybe they don't consider Bazzite Fedora based. Maybe it isn't Fedora based. Maybe Bazzite is Arch based too. I think it's Fedora based, but I could be wrong. But yeah, SteamOS Hollow went up a small amount, whereas CachyOS went up nearly 5%. Arch Linux in general went down. Linux Mint went up a tiny amount. Bazzite went up a 2.5% or so. So it is very much still a competition between, do you want the cutting edge technology that might break with CachyOS, or do you want something a little bit more stable with Bazzite, but still focused around being fairly cutting edge for gaming? At some point we may see CachyOS and Bazzite become more intertwined and less competitors. Or you'll just see Bazzite come out with something that is more cutting edge. Then you have your basic normal Linux is. No bar Linux is weird to see that get a boost. Yeah. But yeah, overall, even if there's slight changes in what Linuxes are being installed, there are fewer Linuxes being installed, which also might be partially an indicator of the difference between somebody's computer being forced to update to Windows 11 versus somebody buying a new computer and installing a Linux on it from their own decision, which would happen far less often. But yeah, if people aren't buying new computers, they probably aren't putting Linux on their old computers. I would be hard pressed to think about putting Linux on my old computer. Like, it just wouldn't make a lot of sense, instead of just leaving as it is and keeping it in the shape that it is in. Moving on, Dune Awakening is getting a single player mode and more story content. That's interesting. Like, it definitely opens up the door to me potentially playing the game. At some point I probably should try to follow the story of Dune. It is a very daunting and long story, I think, and I am frankly scared of the thought of delving deep into it. Yeah, from what I hear, it seems like a lot of people misunderstand the narrative of Dune. But yeah, right now the game is mixed reviewed in the last 30 days, so it may also be that Dune Awakening is not the way to try to ingest Dune anyways. I'd be more happy to just sit through a couple of Dune movies to try to get the story, but even that would probably take way too long. Let's see. Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis releases in February 2027 and uses generative AI. AI assisted tools were used during the development to support some early exploration and temporary development content. That's what they're saying. Yeah. I watched one YouTube video that did make an interesting question, certainly as far as something I would like to see better comparisons made, as far as can we get a really good sample size of games that we know the faces are being 3D scanned in next to the face actors whose faces are being scanned, because the accusation here, and it's somewhat believable, is that some percentage of game developers are taking the raw 3D face scans of male actors and either showing them in their original form or even touching them up to make them even prettier, and then they are doing the opposite for female face actors. Again, an accusation there really requires a burden of proof, so I would like to see if somebody could find the pictures of the face actors and a lot of examples of this. I think in Tomb Raider that accusation probably is not accurate, because I think the face we're seeing of whoever face actor is for this new Lara Croft is just being depicted exactly the way the face actor looks. It doesn't quite look like Lara Croft to me, but whatever. That's not a statement on attractiveness at all. It's just Lara Croft in the past has looked one way. Now she looks different. Which I think is probably a problem with just using 3D face scanners. Anyways, it is also possible that maybe there's something about the lighting that if someone is wearing makeup, the lighting works differently, or something about the softer features of a feminine face scans worse than the harder features of a more masculine face. But let's face it, most of the Hollywood male face actors are probably not that hard in their features either. But yeah, even here, this Lara Croft in that face, just run the comparison, it's kind of different. Yeah, feels a little different. Otherwise though, I will say I think this Legacy of Atlantis game might be very good. Unfortunately, if it uses AI, it's probably better for the game industry to just boycott the game completely. Just to send a message. Yeah. Yeah, if it is the case that we have to sacrifice a Tomb Raider game on the altar of not using AI, that'll be better for the game industry overall, in my opinion. And certainly it will be worse for the game industry if this comes out and it sells like hotcakes. Particular question, certainly, as far as whether the AI was forced upon them, as far as Amazon Game Studios forcing it upon them, or whether Flying Wild Hog used AI, or whether Crystal Dynamics used the AI. I mean, inherently, Amazon Game Studios as a publisher might have had the final say there, but maybe Crystal Dynamics had the final say. Moving on, Domino Calypse ingeniously blends tile-pushing dominoes with a roguelike and puzzle elements. That sounds interesting. And visually, it has a little bit more polish than I thought it was going to have, so I'll give it a chance. You can master the art of sword and sorcery in the early access release of Fate Keeper. Check that out if you're interested. Alright, and that brings us to GameDeveloper.com news. Nintendo is going to debut a Switch 2 model with replaceable batteries in the EU. I will love to see a teardown of that when it happens. Amazon suggests that IO Interactive might not return for a 007 First Light sequel. That seems like a really nasty thing to say when the game just launched. Like, why not just have no comment there? PlayerUnknown Productions is laying off staff and halting development on Go Way Back. An update here. Team 17 has laid off members of its marketing and communications department. 2 employees have been let go. 2 employees doesn't really feel like a lot, but who knows? There might be only 4 employees in total, bringing it down to half of the team being laid off. Communications and marketing departments having layoffs don't feel as bad to me, frankly, as programmers and artists and voice actors and even game testers, because let's face it, I'm not sure how much work communications and marketing departments really are doing that are helpful, and I don't know how well that they're doing their job anyways. It is fairly believable that games are selling despite of publishers and communications and marketing departments, not because of them, and that communications and marketing departments are not being run by people who are actually good at that job. I don't know if I would be good at that job. I'd have to think about it. I probably would have to be very careful not to shoot off my own mouth and think about responses and respond very slowly, but I do think I generally know what the right response is, which for the most part it's usually no comment. And as far as advertisement campaigns, I would definitely have to sit down the developers and figure out what they wanted to convey, at which point I probably would have to hire a advertisement company to develop and display that campaign. It probably wouldn't be a job I would be good at, but I think I could muddle through a lot of it. Pointless to fantasize about that though. Total consumer spending on games topped $60 billion in the United States in 2025. Over half of those surveyed by the ESA made in-game purchases. Well, unfortunately, it does feel like the days of fighting against in-game purchases are mostly gone. That being said, I think they probably are also widening the definition of in-game purchases to include things like DLC or like one-time upgrades versus what you generally think of in-app purchases, which is the consistent reoccurring spending that can happen. And yeah, you hear numbers about half of gamers, however you want to define gamers, that's basically everybody spending in-app purchases, and it does just feed into the disconnect I feel, as far as I just don't feel like gamers really should be spending money for in-app purchases at all, and I don't feel like there's as many people who are being strict about not spending in-app purchase money as there should be. The gamers are being led around by the nose, and becoming sheep too much is a concern, certainly. Alright, well, it's not certainly a short stream, but we now just need to go through all the games that came out on Steam. If I think something is interesting, I'll put it on the follow list, and then I'll swipe to the right to leave the tab open to pretend like I'm going to make YouTube Shorts on it. If I'm uninterested, I'll swipe down and close the tab, and that will be that. I definitely do want to look at this from a newer perspective as we look at the new games that are coming out on Steam, that have come out on Steam in the past couple days, as far as how many of these games could, I'm not going to be able to accuse any of them did, but could have been stolen from an itch.io site or some other game site and put on Steam without permission from the developer. I think the answer is probably all of them, because you just wouldn't really know, would you? Then if you were gonna take it to the next thought, how much did I want for this? $5, ridiculous. Need to start looking at the price of some of these games too. Give this a chance. How many unfinished games potentially are being stolen and put on Steam? certainly, if any of that is happening, which I'd imagine there's some level of it actually happening, would explain the rapid pace of these kinds of games coming out on Steam. It definitely expands the understanding of why so many garbage games would be on Steam, because if it is just an automated process where somebody has figured out how to steal games in bulk, put them on Steam for cheap, and then make even a few bucks off of it, that makes more sense, particularly if you're like putting games on Steam with stolen credit card money, so you're not even paying for the $100 Steam Direct fee. Yeah. It's very believable that people can put stolen identities as the developer and publisher. I would assume that Steam actually requires government IDs, but that's not much of anything. Yeah. I've heard that the back end of Steam is a nightmare and really needs to be updated too, as far as uploading content, and there's probably room for major improvement there, but it would probably also make some sense to better verify the identity of people. One of the things that would be kind of costly, but you certainly can bake it into the application fee, is to require a government ID and then physically print a code and mail that code to a physical address. Or at the very least, make them list an address and then go to Google Street View and see if that address actually matches any records, or have them have a credit card on file and see if that credit card address matches the records. I don't know if you can actually get the address of people from a credit card. Yeah. This would be the next thing that would be crazy for me to buy, would be a Go or shogi style Chinese chess, Japanese chess, which I think are two very different kinds of chess. You know what's really funny is you could probably stop a lot of garbage asset flippers from putting games on Steam if you just required them to prove and have an account that was established long enough that they had spent over $100 of games on Steam on top of that, to say, hey, if you've never even bought a game on Steam and this is a full new account, then we consider you a non-gamer and we don't want you non-gamers posting games for sale on Steam. That'd be a little weird. I still think perhaps a reoccurring $100 every year might eliminate a lot of the people who are just crazy and they're thinking that they're going to make money when their game is awful, and you should realize they're not going to make any money. But usually those people are crazy anyway, so I don't know how many really get eliminated. And certainly that doesn't touch upon the idea of stolen art and stolen game content. Which I definitely, until today, have not been considering that possibility. Of course, as a consumer, I can't really do anything about it either. All I can really testify to is that as somebody who has over like 5,000 games in their library, only once has a game ever been removed from my library, and that was a early access beta of a game that's not out yet. And that was not a welcome pop-up to see with a big yellow warning telling you you've been revoked on that game. But if at any other point I had gotten a game that was stolen, I would have thought I would have seen that revocation. But yeah, I guess also I don't grab absolute garbage games, and that's the other thing is there was a real curation event. That would be weird if like the Summer Games Fest was really more the Summer Games tournament to the death, where it just gamified in some way and encouraged people to find garbage games on Steam and nominate them for elimination, although that would get political really ridiculously high. Yeah. And honestly, you could just look at it all games that are reviewed very negatively and get rid of those, or have a higher charge the more negative your game is reviewed. So that would be gamified too. That'd be kind of crazy to let people review bomb something and then it would cost the publisher more money. Although effectively it probably does cost the publisher more money if a game is reviewed negatively in loss of sales. It's still unfortunately not the case that when we go through these new games that there are great amazing new ideas or amazing hidden gems. Yeah, at some point here I will probably just start eliminating anything with AI in it. Now, this pronoun palace seems like it's probably too much of a meme and too much of a joke game, and I don't even know which political side it is going here as far as the characters go. Yeah, it's rated very positively, but I don't know if this is something I would really want to engage with, because yeah, I think this is probably just making fun of the serious effort to use pronouns to make more people welcome versus a very unserious effort to eliminate new pronouns or force old pronouns on the people just because people are unwelcoming of change. Yeah. Be interesting to play a game called Swan Song after that playing such such a role in Blueprints, but this is obviously not connected to Blueprints, I don't think, in any way. goals here is mixed reviewed already. A shooter game. You don't get too many of those. Yeah, we haven't really seen a lot of these text games either. They do seem like they are probably dying out. Probably because the low effort AI that was making text games can now be implemented to make something look a little prettier than a text game. Let's see, do I even want to really look at any games that have updated? Trying to clean up the follow list even a little bit. I don't think I really want to. Yeah. When I get to the end of these streams, and I really haven't thought about what I was going to do next, so we'll see what happens. Probably going to just take a break and then record some more footage before about midnight, at which point I might start scheduling things and trying going to sleep. Yeah, Monday will be a big day, certainly, with all of the Summer Games Fest trailers. Over the weekend, probably a great time to watch a lot of those trailers on my own time, instead of making the stream on Monday super long. And definitely the focus over the weekend is to schedule videos and move forward on that. That's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.